But at the other end of the manufacturer spectrum is Origin, famous for their extravagance and leisure, but slightly infamous in their mishandling of the original 600i rollout. Let's find out what went wrong the first time around and take a look at how the team aims to address the issues in the current internal concept rework.
So the 600i, when it first came out, was one of those ships that we talked about in the past that has had a troubled development.
The original 600i, its core issue was what we prioritized for space. The rear was a massive habitation area where there was pool tables and bars. And then you had the very front of the ship, which had the bridge and the captain's quarters. And then it forced the entirety of the core gameplay loops of the ship to live in the middle of it. So you had this small module where everything needed to happen.
If you're designing spaceships, you kind of need to make sure that everything's there for a reason. And when we get to the point where we've got kind of big unused areas of the ship that don't really support functionality, it just feels like a wasted opportunity.
The 600i was done relatively early for Origin as a brand. We'd had the 300, and it was the first really big Origin ship that we decided to do. Since then, we've obviously tackled much larger Origin ships with the 890, and throughout the course of the 890, the Origin style completely evolved from what it was, which you had some very technical and wooden surfaces, to instead have this lovely transition that goes between them, which can be seen across the 890, the clear but smooth divide between the different sections of the ship.
In terms of reworking the 600i, we had a sort of very clear brief. We want to bring it up to modern day standards. So there's a lot of features that didn't exist in the game there or weren't accounted for at the time, to integrate those into the ship now, and then to also make better use of the space, because anyone that's been on board a 600i knows there's a lot of walking and going up and down to get to where you want to, and it doesn't really need to be like that.
Currently, the 600i is concept complete. There's a couple of rooms which haven't had full concept work done on them, such as the crew quarters, but for the most part, every room has had a complete and utter rework.
The big change for the module section is its placement. So rather than being the sort of central core of the ship that you had to go through to get to the back half of the ship, it is now in the rear section of the ship, which allowed us to move the common shared areas to the central section. We did that change because it just makes the flow of the interior better. When you have a 600i, regardless of which module you have, you know the front half of the ship is a consistent experience, and then the gameplay alterations with that module is constrained to a very specific area at the back.
So the best way to think of the 600i layout is between three parts. You have the very front of the ship, which is the bridge and the captain's quarters. For the most part, they've remained mostly the same. There's been a few tweaks to the layout of the chairs on the bridge, but generally that hasn't changed very much. The captain's quarters is almost the same as it was before, except it's flipped round. The bathroom moved from one side to the other. The reason for that is directly behind that, the lobby area. On the top deck, we now have a small docking collar with space for a few suits. And the opposite side of that is now a lift to take you between two floors into the rear, the exterior of the ship. Directly behind that, which used to be the modular section, we now have on the top deck the crew habitation area. So it starts off with a large open shared communal space where there's places to eat, make food, and then to the side of that there's 4 private crew bedrooms. The floor beneath that now is where engineering and all the components that allow the ship to function have been moved to. Think very similar to what we've done on the 400i, where you have the separate engineering section beneath. Directly behind that, we then have the ship modular section. We'll start with the expedition version. So on the top deck, at the very, very top, we have the armory. There's a huge armory with plenty of extra suit lockers for you and your friends to take extra equipment depending on what you might encounter. Behind that, we then have the hologlow that allow you to do the exploration. On the middle deck, we then have the medical bay, which will have a medical suite similar to that as the Carrack. It'll have a tier 2 med bed. Beside that, we then have the secondary cargo hold. So this cargo hold, it's more readily accessible for the crew. So it's more for your day-to-day supply. So if you want to have a box full of your food or your snacks, That's where you put it instead of down in your main cargo hold, because you don't want to go rooting through your garage just to find that random pen that you've left. On the bottom deck of the Expedition version, we then have the main cargo hold and garage. So, obviously, as you've seen from the pictures from the recent Inside Star Citizen, it is much, much larger than it was before, with a much, much larger lift to fit much larger vehicles in it. In there, there's also 2 small lifts, one to allow you to bring cargo up to the main cargo area, and then there's the smaller one that goes through the 3 decks. Moving on to the touring variant, we get a completely different experience. The touring's primarily split between 2 main decks, though one of the decks is across 2 floors. So the upper deck brings you out into the large lobby area. From the lobby area, you can choose to go up the side staircases to the main meeting area / eating room, as well as a bar. And if you go left and right from there, you can get to the private guest suites. Private guest suites are very large and luxurious. They also come with their own skate pods. The lower deck is a spa. So the spa has a pool, a sauna, bar, as well as a kitchen for the crew to actually be able to make food for the guests.
So whilst we're kind of doing a complete or almost a complete rework of the interior, on the exterior of the ship, we're trying to keep it as true to how it is now as we possibly can. There will be some slight changes. We'll need to move the hangar bay doors a little bit. There'll be some additional kind of cutouts for escape pods, and we need to fit the airlock in properly. So there will be some minor changes, but overall we're trying to keep it as close to what you see now as a 600 as we can.
So next step is essentially just finding a slot in the production schedule for it.
It's about finding the space where we can start doing the production art and designers can get on board with actually making it come alive again. We're all super excited with the work that we've actually done on it. It's just trying to actually get the schedule to align so that we can begin the work on it. It's not going to start today or tomorrow, but it is something we're looking to try and include as soon as we can.
I think people should be excited for this rework just because of the significant improvements that the ship gets from this. Not only is a much better interior layout for it, even without the modules, the rest of the ship has just got a good improvement. Components are also updated, and it has extra features such as the med bay, which will just improve the gameplay role of the ship.
So yeah, that's an update on the 600i. It's been a bit of a curvy road to get to where we are now, and there's still some work ahead of us before we can really deliver it to the players in the format that we want. But I hope everyone's as excited as we are about kind of finally delivering the original vision of what we want the 600 to be. And I hope everyone has a great IAE.
So what did we learn this week? Well, we learned that Drake is making their way into the starter ship game with the addition of the cutter. That it's available to everyone starting tomorrow at this year's IAE event. That Drake itself knows what some folks think about them, but is going to keep on keeping on because they're actually sort of the best. And that it will take a while yet before the 600i rework comes to fruition, but the path forward will be one that's well worth the wait and finally allows this fan favorite to realize its fullest potential in the persistent universe. Now don't forget that in addition to the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo, there's the annual free fly that goes along with it, and your chance to try out nearly every ship and vehicle that Star Citizen has to offer. Be sure you check out the robertspaceindustries.com website for the full details, and then come back tomorrow for a fun twist on our annual IAE ship roundtable for Star Citizen Live. We actually have a roundtable now, or at least a 6-sided triangle, or a triangle-shaped hexagon. You can be the judge. For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. We'll see you all here next week.